set?
Yeah, we're set.
Let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you for this time to be together, for opportunities to learn, to prepare to serve you, and the church be with us. All that we say and do in Christ's name. Amen. Well, I'm happy to be here with you today to talk about confirmation, and specifically talk about leadership in confirmation, because confirmation does require leadership, and leadership matters in several different ways, some of which I'll talk about. And maybe I'm going to talk for maybe 40 minutes, and then we'll have some question and answer discussion. Is that about right? Okay. As Professor Osmer stated, after I graduated from here, actually my wife also, we went to a suburb of Detroit, and we were pastors in a fairly large Presbyterian church in the suburbs. And we redesigned the confirmation program. And it's a little hard to believe, but they're still using the basic framework that we implemented 25 years ago. It's probably time for them to rethink it. After we left that congregation, we moved to Atlanta. I worked at Emory. My wife served a couple of churches, and then when I came back here in 2003 with faculty, my wife worked at the Nassau Presbyterian Church, and now she's the senior pastor at the Pennington Presbyterian Church. So those four churches, I have served sort of like a pastoral adjunct. That is mainly doing educational ministry in one form or another, and bringing communion to shut-ins twice a year. That's what sort of amounts to, and occasionally filling in. I've been teaching educational ministry here for the last 14 years, and I'm a part of the steering committee for the national project on confirmation with 5 denominations. I have friends, as does Dr. Altmer, in Europe who are involved in confirmation work there, and it's a very different kind of animal. I don't know if you've talked about that at all here. Yeah, okay, good. I know the most about the German context and also the Finnish context, where some of us on the steering committee spent some time in Finland learning about and observing confirmation. So it's one of the things about learning from others is that you learn more about yourself, what it means, what the assumptions are that you have. I want to talk about leadership today. We'll talk about other things related to confirmation, but leadership has several dimensions, and I'm not going to cover every aspect, but I hope to cover or address some of the key issues involved in thinking about leadership when it comes to confirmation. First, I want to talk about getting hired. Right? You got to get a job before you can exercise leadership. And what I want to say here is that search committees usually lie to you. Because they will say, I don't know of a single search committee that I've ever encountered, either in my own life or in presbytery committees, where they didn't say they want to change. Of course they want to change. But what they really mean is something different than what you mean. What they mean is Heifetz's notion of technical change. Mm-hmm. They want you to do what they have always done, but just bigger and better. What you probably have in mind about change, fresh out of Princeton Seminary in this class, is to rethink everything and do it, in a different way, in a way that makes sense. So that presents some problems. The first task of leadership is getting hired and getting attached to and becoming part of the context in which you're working. And that means probably not making major change for a year if you can help it. Because it takes at least a year to learn the language and to get to know the cultural context. Each congregation it's like a village. And I'm drawing on this from Robert Schreider's book, Constructing Local Theologies, and also James Hopewell's book, Congregation. And there's a whole stream of books that have used the tools of cultural anthropology to talk about each congregation as a cultural reality, including a reality that has its own theological profile, its own set of symbols and meanings. And you can't know that just by reading paperwork or just by being interviewed by a committee. Probably the best thing to do is to spend a year doing what they do, fitting into that and learning, gathering intelligence, establishing relationships, and finding out, getting the lay of the land, figuring out who it is that you could work with. Then once you get established, now I would say there's a caveat to that, and that is you don't always have the luxury to get to know people and to know the context. Sometimes things are so bad that it needs immediate change. That's what happened actually with the confirmation program that we walked into, actually the whole youth ministry program in Michigan. What we walked into was people who had graduated from Princeton Seminary and created a 9-month, every Sunday confirmation program, which was mini seminary. It was lecture, direct instruction, and there were written examinations. And everybody hated it. And it was horrible, and it was clear that it needed to change. So we didn't really have the luxury to get to know people and get into their system before we changed this. We had to change it right away. Actually, the thing that helped us the most was a class that we had here that was jointly taught by Gene Dempsey Douglas and Craig Dykstra on the history of Christian education. And what we essentially did was we implemented a version of Luther's approach, which was echoed by Calvin and others, oriented around, content-wise, oriented around the Lord's Prayer, the Apostles' Creed, and the Ten Commandments. What I discovered was when you teach using those 3 instruments, you can teach most everything in the basics of Christian belief and practice, depending on how you use it. But those are really dense instruments, and you can get a lot of mileage out of that. But we also got it off Sunday mornings, and we implemented 3 weekend retreats around each one of those kind of centers of teaching. And then we had some connective tissue between the retreats. So we wanted to develop a relational aspect of things. And also a spiritual dimension. I can talk more about that later. So sometimes you have to make change right away. But if you do that, just beware, it may not go well, because systems have a way of pushing back against change. So you have to be, I think, in ministry, like Jesus said, be as wise as a serpent while you're being gentle as a dove. So getting established, getting to know people. This is what I would say about leadership is my professorial colleagues here and across the country will probably not like the sound of this, but assessment is your best friend. That is evaluation. You can play dumb and bring a series of questions like, how effective is this program? And on what basis are we making our judgments of what's working, what's not working? And you can implement a process. Actually, you can blame it on yourself, saying, I just need to get to know what's going on here. Like, of all the kids in the last 5 years who've gone through confirmation, how many are actually still involved in the life of the church? That's a quantifiable thing. You can find that out. You can find out how many have gone through and how many have been retained, how many are still involved. Usually it's a depressing number, which is helpful if you want to make leverage for change, to say the existing model isn't really working that well. You can also get information about how many kids are there in the pipeline. That is, what we're finding from the confirmation study is that about 3/4 of the confirmands in the study are regulars in the life of the church. They're involved in church school, vacation Bible school, fellowship groups. They're already there, and they're in worship a lot of times. About 1/4 are coming from out of the woodwork, I call it. Very peripheral people. Actually, sometimes adults will join a church in order to have their kids go through confirmation. And there's a lot of theological reasons for that, going back to medieval Catholicism. But so about 1/4 will be out of the woodwork. Another dynamic is that you'll have a big chunk of them who have already been baptized, and always there will be now some who have not been baptized. And it may be the other way if you come from an Anabaptist church or a radical Protestant church, where you've had some as baptized as infants, and then, anyway, by fact, you probably wouldn't even have a confirmation program. You can't assume homogeneity of experience. Okay, so that's key. But you can gather these statistics, these facts, That's part of assessment of how is this program working. You also can then, you know, capitalize on your ignorance. Talk to the parents, talk to the current confirmands, talk to the church leaders involved, and ask them just the three basic questions of assessment, which would be, what's working and why? Why do you think that is? What's not working? You know, why do you think that is? And what could we do differently? Now that will tell you several things. That will tell you their set point. It'll also tell you when you ask what that third question, what do you think we could do? That'll tell you how far they think they could stretch, how much change they could assimilate. They probably can do more than what they're saying, but anyway, it gives you some idea. You probably, as Heifetz talks about, you can't disappoint people at a rate greater than what they can handle. It's a key principle in Heifetz. There's a grief process involved in change, and you need to know what the set point is and how much change are they willing to accept? How much grief, how much letting go of what has been can they handle? If you go too fast and too far, it's going to come to a bad outcome. And it makes it even more difficult to change, and it takes longer. I have known several pastors who have tried to bring about change that in a way that was fundamentally different, let's say it's an adaptive change, than what was existing, what was already in place. And like a rubber band, they stretched it too far and it snapped back. And they were stuck with the existing pattern for 4 or 5 years before they had built up enough credibility and trust to be able then to try it again, try to bring about change. So the assessment process, starting with assessment and getting to know the lay of the land, gives you what the Russian psychologist Vygotsky calls the zone of proximal development. So this is the set point of what they know, what their equilibrium is. And, you know, human beings have an ability, an amazing ability to change. We can go beyond the given. We can imagine change. But there's a limit to how far we can go. Right? And so if you want to have change that's out here, that's beyond, that's distal, that's beyond what people can handle, it's probably not going to work. You have to aim for figuring out what is the zone of proximal development. Proximal means nearby, right? Now this is not just for learning, this is also for change. A lot of leadership about educational ministry and confirmation is figuring out where people are and what is the shape and the extent of the zone of proximal development. And what we want to do is to aim here for change. And over time, this will shift so that eventually you can get here, but not immediately, usually. So it helps to be in a place for a while and to have your eye on some aims and be restless about that and continually agitating towards something, but always within what people can handle. And when you do make some changes, some, you know, let's say interim changes, make sure that there's some success involved and that people feel positively about that, because then you can build on it. I'll come back to that in a minute. How do you gauge that and how do you leverage that? But there are several key stakeholders in the confirmation process that you've got to pay attention to. And they all have some proximal development. It's not all the same either. So there's the kids themselves. They're actually probably the most adaptable, the most flexible. Then there are the confirmation leaders. If you're in a setting that's big enough to have a team, sometimes it's just you. Actually, there's some advantage to that. The disadvantage is it should probably be done, confirmation should be done collaboratively. So I wouldn't recommend it as a long-term strategy. Many places have mentors. That is, they're not teachers, but they're mature members of the congregation who are guides, who are supporters, guarantors,